Right now, someone is testing your boundaries to see how much they can take from you. You don't notice it because they disguised it as a favor, a compliment, or concern for your well-being. They asked you for something small last week, maybe to borrow $20, cover their shift, or listen to their problems for an hour. You said yes because it seemed harmless. But that wasn't the request. That was the test. They were measuring your compliance, mapping your weak spots, and calculating exactly how far they can push you before you break. And that's just the beginning of what I'm about to show you. 73% of people encounter manipulative behavior at least once per week without recognizing it, but 12% of the population uses these tactics deliberately to extract resources, attention, or control from others. Psychologists discovered the foundation of these techniques in the 1960s when Dr. Robert Cialdini began documenting how compliance professionals, salespeople, recruiters, cult leaders bypassed rational decision-making, and what they found shattered every assumption about human autonomy and free will. Today, these manipulation tactics have evolved beyond individual interactions. Corporations use them in marketing algorithms, social media platforms weaponize them to maximize engagement, and toxic individuals deploy them in relationships to maintain power. The average person is targeted by manipulation attempts 17 times per day across digital and physical spaces, and most people never realize they're being systematically conditioned to surrender their mental autonomy, financial resources, and emotional stability. The manipulation industry has become so sophisticated that what once required years of psychological training can now be learned from a $15 ebook. But here's what those manipulation guides won't tell you: every dark psychology tactic has a counter tactic. Every psychological weapon has a shield. And once you understand how these mechanisms work at the neurological level, you don't just defend yourself. You become mentally unbreakable. You've experienced this. Someone made you feel guilty for setting a boundary. They got angry when you said no, then apologized so convincingly that you questioned whether you overreacted. That feeling of walking on eggshells, constantly monitoring your words to avoid their reaction? That wasn't anxiety. That was strategic conditioning. They trained your nervous system to associate your boundaries with conflict, and your compliance with peace. And once you understand how this neurological hijacking works, you'll never miss it, fall for it, or tolerate it again. Before I reveal the 7 manipulation tactics that, once understood, make you psychologically bulletproof, hit subscribe. Understanding these psychological weapons is the only way to defend against them. Let's continue. The foot in the door technique is the foundation of nearly every long-term manipulation strategy. In psychology, this is called incremental commitment escalation, and it exploits a fundamental flaw in how your brain maintains self-image consistency. The technique was formally documented in 1966 when psychologists Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser conducted an experiment in California. They asked homeowners to place a small sign about safe driving in their windows. 2 weeks later, they returned and asked those same homeowners to install a massive, ugly billboard in their front yard about safe driving. 76% agreed. The control group, who hadn't been asked about the small sign first, had only 17% compliance. Here's how it works. The manipulator makes a small, reasonable request that aligns with your values or self-image. You agree because refusal seems petty. Could you watch my bag for a minute? Can I borrow a pen? Would you sign this petition? This first yes creates a microscopic commitment. Your brain now categorizes you as someone who helps this person. When they return with a larger request, refusing would create cognitive dissonance. Your brain would have to reconcile being helpful before but not now. To maintain psychological consistency, you agree to the larger request. In toxic relationships, this looks like borrowing small amounts of money that gradually increase. In workplace manipulation, it starts with staying 15 minutes late, then an hour, then weekends. In cult recruitment, it begins with attending one meeting, then a weekend retreat, then donating savings. The progression is always the same: establish the pattern of yes, then exploit it. Why does this work? Your brain contains a structure called the anterior cingulate cortex that monitors for conflicts between your beliefs and behaviors. When these conflict, your ACC triggers psychological discomfort. Agreeing to escalating requests resolves this discomfort by maintaining consistency. The manipulator isn't convincing you to say yes. They're engineering a situation where saying no feels neurologically painful. The defense is simple but requires discipline: treat every request as independent. Your past compliance creates zero obligation for future compliance. When someone references a previous favor to justify a new request, recognize this as weaponized consistency. Your answer to their current request should have nothing to do with your previous answer. Break the pattern deliberately. Say no to small requests randomly, even when you could easily say yes. This trains both your nervous system and the other person that your boundaries are unpredictable and non-negotiable. This is where psychology becomes weaponized at the neurological level. Intermittent reinforcement is the single most powerful tool for creating psychological addiction, and toxic people use it to forge bonds stronger than healthy love. The setup. Manipulators identify your core emotional needs within the first few conversations. They're scanning for what you're missing: validation, security, excitement, purpose, belonging. They listen for phrases like "I've never felt," "nobody understands," or "I wish someone would." These statements are neurological roadmaps showing them exactly where you're vulnerable. They test boundaries with small violations: arriving late, canceling plans last minute, making subtle criticisms disguised as jokes. They're measuring your tolerance for disrespect. The execution. Once they've identified your deepest need, they become the perfect supplier. If you're starving for validation, they love bomb you with praise. If you need stability, they promise unwavering commitment. If you want adventure, they create intoxicating chaos. But here's the trap: they don't provide this consistently. They give you the most incredible high you've ever experienced, then withdraw completely. You got flowers and declarations of love on Monday. By Friday, they're distant and critical. They praised your work for weeks, then suddenly nothing meets their standards. The psychological trap. Your brain responds to this unpredictability by releasing dopamine, the same neurotransmitter involved in cocaine addiction. But unlike consistent rewards, which your brain adapts to, unpredictable rewards create a state of perpetual anticipation. You're constantly scanning for signs of the good version returning. You feel anxiety because your ventral striatum, the brain's reward prediction center, cannot predict when the next reward arrives. This isn't weakness. This is an evolutionary mechanism designed to help you learn patterns. Manipulators exploit this by creating patterns that your brain cannot solve. Research by Dr. Christine Courtois on trauma bonding shows that intermittent reinforcement creates stronger attachment than consistent positive treatment. Victims of this manipulation show brain activity patterns similar to gambling addicts. The uncertainty doesn't weaken the bond, it strengthens it. You become hypervigilant, constantly trying to earn the return of the good version, believing that if you just behave correctly, the pain will stop and the reward will be consistent. Real-world case study. In 2018, psychologist Dr. Ramani Durvasula documented a case study of a tech executive who remained in an emotionally abusive relationship for 7 years despite having the financial means to leave immediately. The partner would oscillate between weeks of attentiveness, cooking meals, planning dates, expressing affection, and weeks of complete emotional withdrawal and criticism. The executive reported that the good periods felt more intense and real than anything in previous healthy relationships. Brain scans showed elevated dopamine response during the reconciliation phases that far exceeded normal romantic attachment. The unpredictability had literally rewired the reward pathways. The warning signs. You're experiencing this if you find yourself constantly anxious about when the good version will return. You're walking on eggshells, modifying your behavior to avoid triggering the bad mood. You feel more relief than joy when things are good because you're just grateful the tension stopped. You make excuses for their behavior based on occasional good treatment, but when they're good, they're amazing. Pay attention when you notice yourself feeling more attached after fights than during peaceful periods. That's the trauma bond activating. Gaslighting is the systematic dismantling of your perception of reality. This technique exploits the malleability of human memory and your brain's reliance on external validation to confirm internal experience. The mechanism. This exploits a cognitive bias called the misinformation effect. Your brain doesn't store memories like video recordings, it reconstructs them each time you recall them, and this reconstruction is vulnerable to suggestion. Manipulators weaponize this by confidently contradicting your memory of events. Your brain naturally seeks consensus reality, comparing your experience against others' accounts. When someone consistently insists your memory is wrong, your hippocampus, the memory formation center, begins to doubt its own records. The progression. Stage 1, the manipulator makes small contradictions. They said they'd be home at 6, arrive at 8, and insist they said 8. You have a clear memory of them saying 6, but they're so certain you begin to question yourself. Maybe you misheard. You let it go. Stage 2, the contradictions escalate. They deny saying something hurtful that you distinctly remember. They claim an event happened differently than your memory. They insist you're too sensitive or remembering wrong. Your brain enters a state of epistemic uncertainty. You no longer trust your own perception as reliable. Stage 3, you begin doubting your perception in real time. Did they really just say that cruel thing, or are you being too sensitive? Is this situation actually problematic, or are you overreacting? You start seeking their validation before trusting your own experience. They've become your external reality checker. Stage 4, complete dependency. You cannot make decisions without their input because you no longer trust your judgment. They've convinced you that your perception is fundamentally broken. You need them to tell you what's real. This is complete psychological control. Research by Dr. Robin Stern at Yale found that gaslighting victims show decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and reality testing. After prolonged gaslighting, victims perform worse on memory tests even when the gaslighter isn't present. The manipulation creates lasting neurological changes. Why you don't notice? The manipulation happens gradually. It's like the boiling frog analogy. Each individual contradiction seems small enough to dismiss. Maybe I did misremember. By the time you realize your entire sense of reality has been compromised, you've already lost confidence in your ability to assess the situation. Your baseline for normal has shifted. Relationships that started with you being confident and decisive end with you being unable to choose a restaurant without anxiety. The recovery process. Breaking free requires external reality anchoring. Start documenting conversations in writing immediately afterward. Date and timestamp your records. Share your experiences with trusted friends who can provide objective feedback. Therapists recommend cognitive behavioral therapy specifically designed for gaslighting recovery, which rebuilds trust in your own perception through structured reality testing exercises. Support from people who haven't been manipulated by this person is essential because they can serve as uncompromised external validators while you rebuild internal trust. Have you noticed these signs in any relationship? Comment below. Your story might help someone else recognize what they're experiencing. This is where manipulation becomes invisible because it's disguised as group consensus. Humans are tribal creatures. We evolved to survive by conforming to group norms. Manipulators exploit this by creating false social proof or systematically isolating you from authentic social feedback. The principle. Humans look to others for validation of reality, especially in ambiguous situations. This is called informational social influence. Manipulators exploit this by manufacturing consensus, making you believe that everyone agrees with their version of reality, everyone thinks you're the problem, or everyone would handle the situation their way. They create an environment where disagreeing with them feels like disagreeing with unanimous consensus, which triggers intense psychological pressure to conform. Cult mechanics example. The Heaven's Gate cult used this technique with devastating precision in the 1990s. Leader Marshall Applewhite created an environment of total information control. Members lived communally, cut off from outside perspectives. Every day, they attended group sessions where Applewhite's interpretation of reality was reinforced by unanimous group agreement. When individual members questioned doctrines, they weren't just disagreeing with Applewhite, they were opposing the unified reality of 38 other members. The social pressure to conform was overwhelming. Members reported that even when Applewhite's claims seemed absurd that a spacecraft was hiding behind the Hale-Bopp comet to retrieve their souls, the unanimous agreement of the group made their doubts feel like personal failure. Documentary footage shows members using phrases like "we all know" and "everyone understands" to reinforce conformity. When the group collectively decided on mass suicide in 1997, individual members later found dead had written notes expressing last-minute doubts, but they followed through anyway. The manufactured social proof was more powerful than individual survival instinct. Corporate and sales application. This isn't just cults. Multi-level marketing organizations use identical techniques. Companies like LuLaRoe and Amway create environments where recruits are surrounded only by other recruits and successful-seeming uplines. Limited time offers combined with only 3 spots left at this level creates artificial scarcity and social proof simultaneously. You see dozens of people celebrating their success on social media, attending conventions where everyone confirms the opportunity is real. The language mirrors cult tactics. Are you coachable? Translation: will you suppress doubt? Trust the process. Translation: don't question inconsistencies. Your family just doesn't understand the business. Translation: isolate from outside perspectives. When you start losing money, they don't question the system, they question your belief, your commitment, your worthiness. The unanimous group agreement that the system works makes your financial losses feel like personal failure rather than systemic exploitation. Online echo chambers and algorithm manipulation. Social media algorithms amplify this manipulation exponentially. You see content that confirms your existing beliefs because engagement algorithms prioritize content that triggers strong reactions. This creates a false consensus effect where you believe your perspective is more widely held than it actually is. Platform algorithms intentionally show you the same types of comments, the same arguments, the same emotional triggers on repeat. Studies by the MIT Media Lab show that algorithmically curated feeds can shift political beliefs within 6 weeks by creating the illusion that everyone holds certain positions. Research on radicalization pathways found that YouTube's recommendation algorithm could take someone from mainstream political content to extremist content in under 5 recommended videos by creating the impression that increasingly radical positions were normal and widely accepted. Defense strategy. Break the echo chamber by deliberately seeking opposing perspectives from credible sources. Set a personal rule: for every article confirming your belief, read one from a reputable source challenging it. Question consensus by asking, who benefits from me believing everyone agrees? Verify information through direct, original sources rather than commentary. If someone claims everyone knows or everyone agrees, ask them to name 3 specific people and their specific statements. Manufactured consensus collapses under specificity. Most importantly, maintain relationships outside the manipulator's influence. Abusive partners isolate you from friends who might provide reality checks. Cult leaders separate you from family who might question doctrines. Toxic workplaces discourage friendships outside the company culture. When someone tries to cut you off from external perspectives, that itself is the red flag. Have you ever changed your opinion just because everyone else agreed? That's this principle in action. DARVO is the manipulation tactic that makes you apologize for being hurt. The term was coined by psychologist Dr. Jennifer Freyd at the University of Oregon, and it's the signature defense mechanism of manipulators when confronted with their behavior. The casino parallel of confusion. Imagine a slot machine that sometimes pays out when you pull the lever, but most of the time nothing happens, and occasionally it punches you in the face. You'd stop playing immediately, right? But what if it paid out huge jackpots just often enough to make you think the face punches were somehow your fault for pulling the lever wrong? That's DARVO. The manipulator creates a situation where you cannot identify a clear cause and effect relationship between your behavior and their response. The three-stage sequence. When you confront someone using DARVO, the response follows this precise sequence. First, they deny. They didn't do what you're accusing them of. You're misremembering, exaggerating, or lying. That never happened. I never said that. You're making things up. This denial is confident and absolute, designed to make you doubt your own perception immediately. Second, they attack. They don't just defend themselves, they go on offense against your character. You're crazy. You're too sensitive. You always play the victim. You're the one who actually does this. The attack is disproportionate to your original concern. You mentioned they hurt your feelings, they accuse you of being emotionally abusive. This creates psychological whiplash. You came to discuss their behavior, now you're defending yourself. Third, they reverse victim and offender. Suddenly, they are the injured party and you are the perpetrator. They're hurt that you would accuse them. They're devastated by your lack of trust. They're the real victim of your unreasonable expectations. Before you know what happened, you're apologizing for bringing up the issue that hurt you. They flipped the entire script. Why this works neurologically? You're not weak for falling for this, you're experiencing a neurological override. When someone responds to your pain with claims of their own greater pain, your brain's empathy circuits activate automatically. Your anterior cingulate cortex, which processes both your pain and others' pain, cannot ignore their distress claims. Evolution wired you to respond to distress signals because tribal survival required mutual caregiving. The manipulator exploits this by generating distress signals that overwhelm your original concern. Your brain shifts from "I was hurt and need acknowledgement" to "they're hurt and I caused it." This happens at a neurological level before conscious reasoning can intervene. You feel compelled to comfort them, resolve their pain, prove you're not the monster they're suggesting you are. Research by Dr. Harriet Breaker shows that people with higher empathy scores are more vulnerable to DARVO because their automatic empathy response is stronger. The very trait that makes you capable of healthy relationships, empathy, becomes the vulnerability the manipulator exploits. Real-world example and the breaking point. In workplace contexts, DARVO appears when you report harassment. You file a complaint about inappropriate behavior. The response: denial, "That's not what happened." Attack: "You're trying to ruin my career because you're vindictive." And reversal: "I'm the victim of false accusations." Now HR is investigating whether your report was malicious rather than investigating the original harassment. Recovery requires complete separation from the manipulator because DARVO works through repeated conditioning. Each time you accept the reversed narrative, your brain reinforces the pattern. Therapists who specialize in manipulation recovery emphasize maintaining no contact for a minimum of 6 months because any interaction provides opportunity for the DARVO sequence to restart. The neurological pathways that make you susceptible to this reversal need time without reinforcement to weaken. Support groups for DARVO survivors emphasize a crucial rule: document everything before confrontation. When you have written records of the original behavior, the denial phase loses power. Your brain has external evidence to anchor to, making it harder for the manipulator to distort reality. Now that you understand the tactics, you need to understand who uses them. Psychologists have identified 3 personality traits that, when combined, create the most dangerous manipulators. They call this the Dark Triad. Narcissism. Narcissistic personality disorder is characterized by grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy. But clinical narcissism is more specific than arrogance. These individuals have a pathological inability to perceive others as separate, fully realized humans with their own needs. You exist as a character in their story, valued only for what you provide: attention, validation, service, or status. In relationships, narcissists create a cycle: idealization, you're perfect, they've never met anyone like you; devaluation, you're disappointing, you've changed, you're not who they thought; and discard, they move to a new supply source. The pattern is so consistent that therapists can predict the timeline. Red flags include excessive early charm, making you feel uniquely special immediately, talking constantly about themselves while showing minimal curiosity about you, and inability to handle any criticism without rage or complete withdrawal. Studies estimate that between 1 and 6% of the population meets clinical criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, but subclinical narcissistic traits are far more common. The key identifier isn't confidence, it's what happens when their self-image is threatened. Healthy people can accept criticism and adjust. Narcissists experience criticism as existential threat and respond with disproportionate aggression. Machiavellianism. Machiavellianism describes individuals who view social interaction as strategic manipulation for personal gain. These are the chess players who see every relationship as transactional. Unlike narcissists, who need admiration, Machiavellians simply want to win. They're characterized by cynicism about human nature, emotional detachment, and focus on self-interest above all else. In workplace and political contexts, you'll see strategic alliance building with no loyalty, betrayal when it serves their interests, and complete comfort with deception. They're the colleague who befriends you to access your client list, then takes credit for your work. The partner who maintains backup relationship options while claiming commitment to you. The friend who collects your secrets as leverage. Historical example: when psychologists analyzed letters and documented behaviors of figures like Niccolò Machiavelli himself, who literally wrote the book on political manipulation, they found consistent patterns: viewing relationships as tools, maintaining multiple contradictory alliances, and zero emotional attachment to other people's well-being. Modern assessment using the Mach 4 scale shows corporate executives score significantly higher than the general population, with senior leadership showing the highest scores. Psychopathy. Psychopathy is distinct from narcissism in one critical way: narcissists need your admiration, psychopaths don't need anything from you emotionally. They're characterized by lack of empathy, shallow affect, impulsivity, and absence of guilt. Not all psychopaths are violent criminals, that's a Hollywood myth. Most live ordinary lives, but their internal experience is fundamentally different from neurotypical people. Research using fMRI scans shows that psychopathic brains have reduced activity in the amygdala and ventromedial prefrontal cortex when viewing images of people in pain. They literally don't process others' suffering as emotionally significant. Studies estimate that 1% of the general population meets criteria for psychopathy, but 4% of corporate CEOs score high on the psychopathy checklist, 4 times the base rate. Psychopaths in positions of power are especially dangerous because they make ruthless decisions without the hesitation that empathy creates. They'll fire 500 employees before Christmas without losing sleep. They'll destroy your reputation to protect their interests with zero remorse. The absence of guilt isn't a choice, it's a neurological difference. When all three overlap. When someone exhibits high levels of all three traits simultaneously, you're dealing with maximal danger. Dr. Delroy Paul Huss, who extensively researched the Dark Triad, warns that these individuals combine the narcissist's need for dominance, the Machiavellian's strategic calculation, and the psychopath's emotional emptiness. They're charming enough to attract you, strategic enough to exploit you systematically, and remorseless enough to destroy you without hesitation. If you recognize these overlapping patterns, someone who demands admiration, treats relationships as purely transactional, and shows no genuine remorse for harm caused, the appropriate action is complete disengagement. Don't try to appeal to their empathy, they don't have it, don't expect consistency, they have no internal moral framework, and don't believe promises, they're strategic tools. Document everything, involve authorities when necessary, and create physical and psychological distance. Have you encountered someone with these traits? Understanding the profile is your first. Now that you understand the tactics and the manipulators, here's how you become psychologically bulletproof. Defense 1, the gray rock method. When someone thrives on emotional reaction, positive or negative, you eliminate the reward by becoming completely boring. When they provoke you, your response is neutral, okay. I see. Noted. No anger, no justification, no emotion. You provide no supply, no engagement, no entertainment. This works because manipulators are psychological vampires who feed on your emotional energy. When you stop providing it, they lose interest and move to easier targets. Practice this by rehearsing emotionally neutral responses to common provocations. You're so sensitive gets that's your perspective. You always do this gets I hear you. You're not engaging the content, you're refusing to play the game. Defense 2, reality anchoring through documentation. The defense against gaslighting is external memory. Keep a journal with dates, times, and exact quotes of important conversations. Take screenshots of text messages. Send yourself emails summarizing verbal conversations immediately after they happen. When someone claims they never said that, you have time-stamped evidence. This isn't about proving them wrong, it's about maintaining your grip on reality. Experts in psychological abuse recovery recommend apps like Journey or Day One for encrypted documentation. The act of writing also reinforces memory formation, making your recollections less vulnerable to manipulation. Defense 3, the boundary audit. Most manipulation exploits boundaries you haven't consciously defined. Conduct a boundary audit. What behaviors will you tolerate? What warrants ending a relationship immediately? When someone crosses a boundary, what specific consequence follows? Write these down. Red flag checklist: do they respect no the first time? Do they try to negotiate non-negotiable boundaries? Do they punish you with withdrawal or anger when you set limits? If you see 3 or more boundary violations in a month, you're dealing with systematic manipulation. The action is clear escalation: state the boundary once, enforce the consequence immediately, end the relationship if violations continue. Defense 4. Therapeutic support and pattern recognition. You can't see manipulation clearly while you're in it. External perspective is essential. Seek therapists who specialize in trauma bonding, narcissistic abuse recovery, or complex PTSD. Specifically look for practitioners trained in internal family systems, IFS, therapy or cognitive processing therapy, CPT, which are evidence-based treatments for manipulation recovery. Support groups like those offered by organizations such as CODA, Codependence Anonymous, provide peer validation. Book recommendations that survivors consistently credit: Why Does He Do That? By Lundy Bancroft, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, and Psychopath Free by Jackson Mackenzie. These resources help you recognize patterns across different contexts. Defense 5, cultivating emotional regulation. The most powerful defense is a regulated nervous system that doesn't react impulsively. Daily practices: breath work, 4-count inhale, 7-count hold, 8-count exhale, calms the amygdala and strengthens prefrontal cortex control. Mindfulness meditation builds awareness of emotional triggers before they control behavior. Physical exercise regulates cortisol and rebuilds stress tolerance. Timeline for seeing results: 6 to 8 weeks of consistent practice creates measurable changes in emotional reactivity. When you can feel anger without immediately acting on it, feel hurt without immediately seeking validation, you've removed the manipulator's primary access point, your unregulated emotional responses. Which defense strategy will you implement first? Let me know below. This isn't just individual. These aren't just personal relationship issues that you solve by avoiding toxic individuals. These tactics are institutionalized in advertising that exploits your insecurities, political campaigns that weaponize fear, corporate cultures that normalize exploitation, and social media platforms designed to manufacture outrage. We're all swimming in manipulation that's been normalized as business as usual. Cultural amplification through digital platforms. Social media monetizes attention and engagement, which creates financial incentives to weaponize psychological manipulation. Facebook's algorithms promote content that triggers anger because angry people engage longer. Instagram's interface exploits intermittent reinforcement. You scroll hoping for that dopamine hit of an interesting post, never knowing when it will appear. TikTok's For You page creates parasocial relationships where you feel connected to people who don't know you exist. Whistleblower Frances Haugen's testimony to Congress revealed that Meta's internal research showed Instagram caused increased depression and suicidal ideation in teenage girls, but the company buried the findings because the engagement was profitable. Platform algorithms don't accidentally promote divisive content, they're designed to exploit the exact psychological vulnerabilities we've discussed. The business model is manipulation. The cost we're paying. Studies show that 43% of adults report significant mental health impacts from manipulative relationships. The economic cost of workplace manipulation: decreased productivity, medical leave, turnover exceeds $200 billion annually in the United States alone. 1 in 3 romantic relationships ends due to patterns consistent with emotional manipulation. But the invisible cost is the erosion of our collective ability to trust reality, trust relationships, and trust our own perception. The real question isn't just how you personally defend yourself. The question is, do we accept systematic psychological manipulation as normal? Do we teach manipulation recognition and emotional regulation as mandatory curriculum in schools, giving children the tools before they're targeted? Do we hold platforms and institutions legally accountable for designing systems that intentionally exploit psychological vulnerabilities for profit? Do we create legal protections that recognize psychological abuse as seriously as we recognize physical abuse, with actual consequences for perpetrators? Because awareness alone isn't enough. Individual defense is essential, but systemic change is necessary. As long as manipulation is profitable, incentivized, and legally consequence-free, you'll spend your entire life defending against attacks that shouldn't be happening in the first place. Policy CTA. Comment if you believe this. Psychological manipulation tactics, their mechanisms, and defense strategies should be taught as part of mandatory education starting in middle school, the same way we teach physical health and safety. Subscribe CTA. If you want to understand the psychology behind manipulation, control, and influence, if you want to protect yourself and the people you care about, subscribe. We're exposing the tactics that institutions profit from you not understanding. We're teaching defense strategies that make you psychologically bulletproof. We're not stopping until manipulation recognition is common knowledge and exploitation has consequences. Final statement. Knowledge is your defense. Awareness is your shield. Once you see these patterns, the foot in the door progression, the intermittent reinforcement, the gaslighting, the DARVO, the Dark Triad traits, you can't unsee them. They lose power the moment you recognize them. And that's exactly the point. You're no longer the target. You're mentally unbreakable.